you're live.
So can you see my screen?
Yes.
Yep. Okay. So thank you all for attending. This session will be, I'm only going to be speaking for about 10-15 minutes tops. And then what we're going to do is break out into rooms and actually do the work of building user stories. But obviously for that, I should not be assuming that everyone understands what a user story is. So that's the part that we're going to start with. So we'll be talking, I'll just be talking about the different domains in ASVS, Application Security Verification Standard. We're going to be talking of why user stories, what are they, how we build one, the anatomy of a story. I'm going to provide some examples of user stories, and then we're going to talk about how we're going to, what we'll be doing in this session and how. So to begin with, I will actually share this link with everyone now. So this is an open document. So all of you should get access to it just by having the link. And what we'll be doing is, we're going to be working directly on this spreadsheet across all of us, and taking it from there. So
you said spreadsheet, but this is
spreadsheet slides. Sorry.
Slides. Okay.
Yes. Okay, so I've also on the slide, you'll see the link to the actual ASVS. I'm going to be flipping through back and forth to it as well when we start building some of those stories. But basically, the Application Security Verification Standard, ASVS for short, is one of the flagship projects within the OWASP, and it's a really good document that I think everyone would agree has become the de facto standard for application security across the world. One of the things that I've been having some Twitter conversations about with Andrew van der Stok and Daniel Cuthbert is that the standard is very good, but up until now, no one actually developed the part on user stories and also the tests that could go along with it, and have that as something that is shareable. So I've reached out to them a few months ago, and that's why we put this talk on the calendar for the Open Security Summit. In that I was trying to find some user stories that I could use with one of my customers, and I couldn't find any. So that's what's driven me suggesting that we could use the Open Security Summit to start building some, and then to release them as open source so that people can use them as well. So these are the different domains in ASVS. So it starts with things that are more kind of, I would call them management related. So in terms of architecture, design, and threat modeling, and then all of the other ones are more technical in their nature. So we've got a section for authentication and verification, session management, access control, validation, sanitization, and encoding. Stored cryptography, error handling and logging, data protection, communications, malicious code, business logic, file and resources, API and web service, and configuration of verification. So for some who may have not seen what ASVS looks like in the past, this is what it looks like. So we have for each of them, they've defined within the standard itself different levels. So we have level 1, 2, and 3, and each of them have lots of requirements that build into each of the stages. What happens is when we get to the actual definition of what requirements we're looking for, we're going to always have the L1, L2, and L3, which relate to the different parts, and also a link to CWE, so the common weakness enumeration, which is a framework to categorize security weaknesses. So through them, we've got, on all of them, we have an identifier. So V1, it's about the architecture, threat modeling, and all that stuff. And then in each of them, we'll have 1.1 is for SDLC requirements, and we're going to have then 3 parts to it, where we go through each of the requirements in detail and what they mean. Right, but these are written as requirements, okay, which in my opinion is less beneficial, generally speaking, right? In terms of how we can communicate better with engineering and the development teams. A big part of the problem in this is my opinion, of the communication barriers between security and the development teams or engineering teams starts here, in that we are pretty much still used to using requirements as spreadsheets or things like that as an industry overall. So there are companies that obviously work differently within this domain. But we still are much of the approach of checklist based stuff that we didn't expect people to interpret and understand what it means to them. Um, so this is not really ideal, because as soon as developers see our checklists that we use, we in security we've got a problem with checklists. Generally speaking, we like checklists for everything. In some of these things, it really they tend to see it as more of the same, and they may not collaborate as much if we were to try and define the things that that we would like to see done in a way that is more integrated with how they deal with the rest of their work. And the rest of their work is usually defined as user stories. So I think it's part of enabling better communication between security and the development teams, is to start talking in user stories as opposed to just talking or communicating through checklists full of requirements. So what are user stories? So a user story is a small, actually the smallest piece of work that represents some value to an end user and can be delivered during a sprint, right? So I think this is very important as well. Is when we tend to think, obviously I'm generalizing again, but when we tend to think about security work, we sometimes define we need to harden our application, and it becomes this behemoth of requirements that may take anywhere between 3 months in 35 years to actually get done, right? Depending on how pragmatic we are at setting requirements. And the problem is that usually that is driven from as security people thinking more in terms of how we're helping the organization manage risk, and how we want to reduce the overall risk exposure that we have, which is not a bad problem or a bad approach. That's what we are hired to do as security professionals, is help the organization manage risk. The challenge is then what does that mean to the knowledge worker? What does that mean to the engineer and to the developer? That sometimes doesn't become as clear, because we've got all of these wonderful things that we'd like to do, but it's not translated in a unit that is meaningful to the people that we want to influence. Right? And so starting to think more in terms of user stories as opposed to big transformation programs, I think is the way to go. So before we look into how to actually build a story, there's some criteria called INVEST about how we can think of what makes a good story. So what good looks like. So I really like this criterion. I try to use it every time I'm coming up with a user story. So it should be independent. So that means that it can be developed in any sequence, and changes to one shouldn't affect another one, right? So if we've got different user stories, a developer or engineer should be able to go into the backlog and say, I want to deal with this one, a pull type mechanism. It should be negotiable, right? And that's another part where a lot of the security work tends to be too prescriptive. So we should define what is the story that we want to address, and then it's up to the team how they actually implement it, right? Because that's what they do. That's how they get requirements from the business, right? The business tells them what they need to do, and it's up to them to define what's the best way to implement that. And us in security being too prescriptive, again, doesn't help with this communication and breaking down those barriers. It needs to be valuable. So each story should deliver a detached unit of value to the end users, whoever those users are. We're going to talk about it next. It should be estimable. So if we define the user story, a developer should be able to look at it and say, I think this is going to take 2 days, it's going to take 2 weeks, however long it's going to be. So the story itself should be worded in a way that is easy for someone else to create an estimate on. It should be small. So ideally it should go through the whole cycle. So design, code, and test in one sprint, right? And this is again where a lot of our security approaches and how we work with organizations is less than ideal, right? That we are very good at making sure that that we set a requirement, but then we don't actually have a validation if that control or that thing that we're doing is going to stay there. Right. So we think a lot about the requirement, about making the thing happen, but not on how it's going to be continually checked to ensure that the control is still effective. And that's what really makes a security program scale, right? Because if we always do the full cycle, design, code, and test, then we know that if in 3 months' time someone is going to make a change that would potentially affect the security control we've developed, if we've got a test for it, then we're going to make the teams benefit from the shorter feedback loops, knowing that they broke something. And if they see that they broke something, they can do something about it. But if we just think about security requirements as the thing that needs to be done now and not as the thing that needs to be continually validated, then 3 months down the line, something can happen that actually removes that control or makes it ineffective, and we will not have a way to actually know it happened, right? So thinking about the whole cycle is important. And finally, the testable, right? So it needs to have some acceptance criteria to check whether it's implemented appropriately. And that's where scenario testing comes in, which we'll also cover today. Any questions on those? Let's move on then. So the anatomy of a story. A story starts with this simple structure, right? As a type of user, I want an action so that there's a benefit or a value, right? My proposal for how to approach these stories is that obviously you can write a story from any point of view, right? So you can talk about it from the perspective of the product owner. We can talk about it from the perspective of the security manager, the security engineer, the developer, whatever we want to, from the customer. We have lots of different ways of trying to of talking about security, generally speaking. I'm proposing that in order to standardize this, at least this initial approach to developing something open source with regards to ASVS stories, that we would stick either to security engineer for most of the requirements, and probably as a security manager or security architect for the initial part on threat modeling, design, and architecture, just so that we could, at the end of it, have something that has a coherent approach to all of them. So that is kind of my proposal. But this is how to build a story. As a type of user, I want something so that it delivers value to someone else. So the way I like to approach this is also separate what is the feature that we're trying to build, because at the end of the day, security in a lot of ASVS are actually features of our products. So I'm proposing that we write first with a feature at the top that can serve kind of as a title. So this is what this story is going to be about. And then we can write in the actual story with the structure that I've mentioned. So in this case, a feature could be an HTTP response content type header specifies safe character sets. In the story is, as a security engineer, I want to allow only safe character sets in HTTP responses so that I can prevent unsafe character sets which could obfuscate malicious activity. Okay, and this is kind of the example of the story that I'm sharing now. The other part, which I think has two big benefits, is that we can think about the scenario testing. So how are we going to ensure that the story has been implemented appropriately? So at the scenario level, the title also helps. So we are going to specify what are the allowed character sets. And then the structure is one of given, ends, when, then, right? And that's kind of what you do for one of the approaches for scenario testing. So in this example, what we're saying is with regards to 14.4.1, which the ASVS requirement says, verify that HTTP response contains a content type header specifying a safe character set. We've got a UTF-8 or ISO 88591. And so how we can write the scenario testing for this is given an HTTP response and an, it's not and, it's and an HTTP security header. When specifying an allowable character set, then only UTF-8 or ISO 88591 should be allowed. Okay, and I think this is really, really important for two things. So I've mentioned this in other talks that I've been doing on worldly mapping as well, but a lot of security people have a concern with having the skill sets to perform compliance as code and that type of stuff. But what I'd like to say is, if we start thinking about user stories in the scenario testings, the code itself is the easy bit. Right? So I'll come back. I'll then come back. So, for instance, if we were thinking about that scenario testing where we said this is the safe character set, and this is how I can it means that I will only allow UTF-8 ISO 8859, then writing the code becomes really simple. We just need to follow the same structure. This is using InSpec, which is a compliance as code language by Chef, based on Ruby. And then writing the actual code becomes really simple. If we thought about it from a user story and then about the scenario, and then translating the scenario to code actually makes the whole process much easier. So if you are thinking or on the fence about exploring compliance as code as something that you could do, because you may not see yourself as a coder. So my background is infrastructure. And I can probably say that in system administration, that in the late 90s, one of the reasons I didn't go to application security, etc., was that I wanted to avoid coding. I did not see myself as a coder. I was more of a system administrator, etc. But in the meantime, kind of software ate the world, so the world is now different, and we should be adapting accordingly. Right. So I think this is thinking in these terms of what were our security requirements in a checklist format, translating them into user stories and then scenarios is a good kind of transition into actually starting to write code and feeling comfortable doing it. So what I've done on the slides that you will see is I've created a section. It's the blue page that is separating all of the 14 domains in ASVS, what we're going to do. Each of them has an example of this template. And what I'm going to suggest is that we go through them one by one and create one slide for each of them. So having the different ASVS ID that we're going to deal with at the top, and then on the left writing the user story, and on the right writing the actual scenario. What I am going to say is if you don't feel comfortable about writing the scenario, if it feels too foreign at this time, don't worry about it. Just try focus instead on writing as many features in stories as possible, right? So the idea is that we get as much as done possible within these 2 hours that we have. Yeah, if you don't feel comfortable in scenarios, don't worry. We will deal with that later. So what I propose that we do in this session is to break out into rooms. I would suggest groups of 2, no more than 3 into each breakout room. We choose an ASVS domain to work on, and then we iterate through all of them. So someone would have to either share their screen, or we both open, everyone opens their own version of the slides, and also having ASVS open in front of you, which I do as well. And we kind of go through each of the domains on the items one by one and try to write a user story for it, in the scenario test for it, if we feel comfortable. And then what we do is we copy paste that template X amount of times, depending on the amount of requirements that we're going to go through. And at the end, we're going to leave the last 15 minutes to kind of come back into the main room. Ideally, someone within each of the groups to share what they've worked on, and also about what the experience was, trying to create user stories. And then either during the weekend, there is something that I'll probably add after I finish talking now, a page at the end. But what I have planned would be likely to be done only next Monday. but to make a contribution to the main ASVS repository, that I'd like to, if you feel comfortable with it, leaving your name, your email address, because I'd like to provide credit to everyone that contributes when I make the pull request, and to have this integrated into the actual main ASVS repo. And it's an open source contribution that we would make out of this Open Security Summit.
And as soon as you said contribute and breakout rooms, some people left. So now we are 4 people left in.
Fair enough. Hopefully they at least learn what user stories are, etc. And
yeah, it was quite good. I never really had a session like that before. I didn't really know the good characteristics of a good user story.
Yep.
Anyway,
so how many do we have then?
So it's you, me, Killian, and Dennis. I'm not sure if Dennis is in this session or is he is taking part in multiple sessions today. So
yep.
we might not even need a breakout room, and we can just select one. Oh,
yeah, Louis is coming.
Here. Okay, great. Then we can do. We can make 2 rooms.
Yep, I think that would be cool. So, Cillian, is that how you pronounce your name? Sorry,
Killian.
Killian.
Hi.
Okay.
Good morning. Yeah,
hey.
Killian here.
Yeah.
Oh. Yeah, we've got someone else also joining, Paul.
Nice.
Yeah. So, yeah, you've missed the first part of the session then, but oops. So what we were going to do now is go on to onto breakout rooms and start building user stories based on this document that I've shared on the chat. So you should have access to it, I would hope.
We share it.
Yeah, yeah, and we start working from there. So the plan is that we go into the breakout rooms and we choose a scenario, one of the sections, and start going through this in the relevant ASVS section and start creating some user stories based on the ASVS requirements.
So
for those that didn't join at the beginning, are there any questions regarding the exercise or regarding what a user story is, etc., and how we can approach this?
Louis here. Maybe by stories, do we want one Gherkin statement, kind of like what cloud security has?
Yep. So what I'm suggesting, you can still see my screen, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So what I'm suggesting is that we try as much as possible to create to categorize what is the feature we're working on. So a user story, and then on the side the Gherkin statement. So for the scenario testing. So in doing this across the different ones, basically.
So the feature is not based on a section, or is it based on a section and the scenario is a statement, or is the feature a statement and multiple scenarios?
Yeah, it can be multiple scenarios, right? But I was what I was suggesting is that we try and put in at least one scenario for against the feature.
Yes, but what I'm saying is for chapter 14, section 4.
Yep.
Statement 1. That's what you have there.
Yes,
so
correct.
Is that a feature, or is chapter 4, section 4 the
yes.
feature? And
yes, it is the requirement. So in ASVS we've got requirements, not features, right? But yes. Let me.
Any of them, any good too. Doesn't matter which.
Yep. Oops. 13. We've got yeah, 14.4.1. I think it was. Yep. So this is the HTTP security header section, and this is the 14.4.1. Yep. So as
I will look at the sections, maybe the domains, and I can create 2 rooms for 2 different domains and assign you guys to to them?
Yep. So I had already kind of made a rough start on the cookie section. So I'd like to start with some of the easier ones and the ones that are also then easier to write actual inspect tests against. So HTTP method in inspect is really simple to use. So I would like to, if someone would like to join me on going through the cookie section, which is section 14. And then another group could pick another one that they want and go through that one instead. And if we've got more time available, I'm not sure how much this is going to take, then we can select another one before the end of the session.
Killian, are you happy to do section 14 with Mario?
Yeah, I can do that. Yeah, thanks.
Okay, let's
Good.
do that then.
Louis, you and I, we can do. We can be the other room. Which one would you like to focus on?
I don't know. Take a pick.
So I would suggest leaving the threat modeling, the first one, out because Stephen, I think, he already started some work on that. So I think he will be contributing a bit more on that later. So that's probably work that someone else is already doing.
Okay, I'm gonna open the rooms and we can decide it in the room.
I'll
Yep,
be
sounds
back in
good.
3 minutes. I need to give my children the jackets, so I'll be back in 3
okay.
minutes in the room.
I'll-
Okay, Didar?
That's okay.
Sounds good.
Okay. Cheers. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Didar? Hello? Let me stop sharing. Hello.
Hi.
Hi. I had lots of fun.
We did too, but
Oh,
we managed to do 3, and with multiple scenarios mostly.
oh, cool. So we did one scenario for each, and we did 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and we were on our 8th.
Very good. But you already had the templates and
Hello?
stuff, right? Hi.
The what, sorry?
Oh, just a second.
I had lots of fun.
We also did all in all like 7 scenarios, Didar.
Yeah, we did 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 scenarios.
Okay,
Ooh.
so we're not so far behind.
No,
Yeah.
no.
Yeah, good collaborative effort.
And considering it was my very first time creating
Yep.
any user story, Louis had a hard time teaching me. So thanks, Louis.
It was really good, the conversations around it. So how do we translate this into something that that a tester could come in, or we could test the S code, etc. But it was really good. I really enjoyed it.
Okay, I'm going to send ours to you.
Yep, because yeah, I noticed that you couldn't do, and I'm going to add all to the same document.
Okay, what do we want to talk about now? Last 15 minutes. So one thing I realized while looking at ASVS, as not such a technical person, I was able. We did 3 verification points: 811, 812, 813.
Yep.
The first 2 I was able to understand. The third one, I wasn't able to understand the intent of it. So,
Yep.
So if Louis wasn't there, I would have had to ask someone else.
Yep. But that's how it works, right? So I think what the ASVS is really good at is at allowing the conduit for people that are more from a governance perspective to tell developers what it means to them, right? It's just that the language just has requirements. It's good for the governance folks, but sometimes developers or testers may not necessarily understand what it means to them, right?
I am the governance folk, so I didn't understand what it was. So,
yeah. Yeah, there are a few that some are easier than others, right? As with everything, because the thing about Daniel and Andrew is that they so one of the 2 leaders of the project is they're really technical, right? So I can only assume how hard it was for them to try and come up with the technical stuff that I'm sure they know off the top of their head very well, and try to come up with a requirements type written statement of what that means. But
it is a great body of work.
yeah, definitely.
I'm glad it is there. I should read it in more detail, really.
Yeah.
And I might come back to you with lots of questions while I'm doing that.
So I'm not an application security expert, but I usually use the thing. I'm much more versed for cloud infrastructure protection than I am for applications. But yeah, it's one of
I'll
those
ask
that
the whole community and
yeah.
be a pain for all of them.
Is Dennis still with us? So
Yeah,
Dennis,
I'm
the
here.
application
Sorry.
expert.
Yeah, I'm here. Sorry, I literally had a sequence of calls that I had to take. You know, it's one of those things that, you know, unfortunately, but I definitely, I was actually seeing the slides. You know, there's some amazing stuff that you're doing, right? I think you, and I actually think, you know, the whole compliance as code, Mario, you need to run with it. I think you got a very sweet spot, right? That it's one of those things that is spoken a long time. And I think you found yourself in a very interesting epicenter of knowledge and topics. So, you know, this is the way to do it, right? Like you, some of the guides, right? The problem with the testing guide, the problem with ASVS, the problem with OpenSAM is that they never went a couple levels down.
Yep.
And that, you know, not being funny, but that made it very good consulting ware, right? But on the real world, it's not usable, right?
Yep. And that's the thing. It's the biggest benefit is really using it as a communication tool, right? It's not just about the actual security in CI/CD, which is obviously important. That's the reason why we're doing it. But using it as a communication tool to bridge the gap between the language that the governance people use and the technical folks. I think it's this is it, right? It's in these types of things that we can help bridge that communication gap.
Yeah, but don't go shy with the fact that you're also creating an enforcement tool.
Yeah, definitely.
You know, and I think you need to, you know, take that head on, right? Like it is an enforcement tool because, but actually that's what the devs want, right? That's what you want. You want, you know, when in security we say don't do X or don't do Y, you know, where's the test, right? And where's the, you know, where's the thing about, you know, how to create it? And you know, I have to say that, you know, the thing that I started doing after a while was to find that not being able to write a test, for example, or not be able to validate it, it's a bigger problem than whatever that is, right? Because the thing about this is I've experienced developer teams that they can do it. And why they can do it? Because their test suite is so mature that, of course, they can add those tests. In fact, they already have some of them in their unit test anyway. You just maybe sometimes move them to another place, right? So fundamentally, the other thing I think you need to make sure you address head on is that you are really putting an X-ray on the maturity of the test framework. Right? Because that's the bottom line. Like the biggest challenge that you have to put all this in place is a mature test framework.
So should that be the next OWASP project?
No, yeah, it's already there. So the thing is, ASVS was built to be testable, right? It's just that no one picked up yet the part of actually making the test, right? But the whole ethos of the project is it was to make it testable.
So I'm happy like to put some of our resources to do it, right? Like for me, this represents exactly where I want my engineering teams to go. Right. You know, so again, like, you know, I'm happy to put some of our resources to this, right? And say, look, you know, implement this. And that's why I like the COVID Safe Paths application, because it's a real world app. We can collaborate and we can just get on with it, right? You know, even if they don't dance, right? But they are, right? They're amazing, right? But I think that's a good example. And look, have you seen the news today, right? Like, you know, tracing applications are very important, right? And I think those guys have a good chance. So what they give, you, for example, is the ability to actually, what's it called, to test those things. In fact, can you pop in on that session today? I think it's at 5 with them.
I am doing the Cleven one at 5.
You're doing, I know, and that's for sure, because I want to be on that one. So have you published the slides, right, on this? Do we have the slides already?
They're shared. I shared on the chat, but I can send you the link again. Yeah,
just send me the link on Slack, because what I want to do is what I want to do on that session is to go through like real world examples of where the next steps and the stuff that you do. I think is a perfect example of how to scale, ASVS, how to scale compliance as code. And when we talk about the labels, and if you've seen the stuff I was doing down with the labels, I actually think my view is that there should be a direct line between those compliance as code tests and the label. Right?
So actually that's what I've on the example that I provided on InSpec, I think on the slides. So actually that one doesn't have, so I've got, I had already done a few InSpec checks to do, but basically I'm adding tags on all of them. So the ones that I'm actually using, because I think that's also the next part of how to make this actually useful for a bigger audience, right? Which is one thing is the test, right? We can have a test to say we're going to verify cookie security, but then we know that people use a multitude of frameworks, right? On ASVS it may be 14.4.1, in ISF it will be something else, on the other framework someone will call it something different. And having that ability to write the test once and then tag the multiple compliance frameworks that it helps you meet, I think that's key, right? So that we can.
Ben could come into play here, right? He's doing lots of mapping through.
Exactly, I was about to say that, right?
What? Sorry.
Ben Scofield.
Oh.
You collaborate with him, so.
I don't know what he's doing in that space.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
What he's trying to do, he's trying to and he's done it already. So he shared almost like an intersection of 5 or 6 standards. So I think ISO 27000. I think he has OpenSAM or ASVS, and he has SOC, and I have a bunch of others. So he basically tried to find what is the relationship amongst them to say, here's one control, and this control relates to this one, that one, that one, and that one. And of course, each one has different names, like you said, but it's like that graph, right? So what he's missing is exactly the test, right? Okay. And I think I think that the thing that we should focus now, or one of the things we should work about, is making that end to end. So you need this thing where you go all the way from the test, all the way to a label, right? Because until you have that, you don't have the feedback loops, right? And you need the management support, you need the economic model, you need somebody saying, I don't want to be, 17 out of 50. I want to be 25 out of 50. I want to be X, right? I don't want to be red. I want to be orange, right? Until you have that, there is a momentum that won't be picked up, because it's the ground. You need almost the developers to have that time to focus on writing those tests that go to it. The problem,
I think there are 2 aspects of it. So I've talked about it on my worldly mapping things as well. I think compliance people in the future will be expected to codify their policies as code, right? And I think depending on the organization, it's going to. So I would like to one day work with a compliance team where they're not just issuing Word documents; they're actually writing the codes, the code in tests to verify, and the communication between them and developers is, look, here's the test, right? When your software passes the test, then we're good.
They become the real enablers rather than
they start codifying in actual code what the policy requirements are. In that way, that again, you don't, if you go talk with a QA team, if you go talk to check your performance, to check your other things, there are tests around it, right? Developers receive tests from other functional areas, right? And that's how they know what tests they need to pass, especially companies working with TDD and all of that, right? So if we as security people could start saying, look, I'm not going to send you a list with a spreadsheet with 100 lines on what you need to do. Here are the tests, right? That's it. Right? Once your software passes the test, then we're good.
But you see, that was my big epiphany a couple of years ago. It was when I realized tests is a lingua franca. But you know what's really interesting? Because you need to understand why that haven't happened. Because what it does, it actually puts a lot of responsibility on the security teams, right? It's very easy to throw a paragraph to the other side. Oh, you should do this, you should do that, you should do this. When you send a test, well, you're not, the question you're going to get from the other side is, so if I pass this test, I'm good, right? And that's a tough one, right? That forces a lot more discipline, which actually we should have, right? I think we should embrace that accountability, because the bottom line is that if we find a gap, we just improve the test, right? It should be a loop, right? It doesn't mean that is it for the rest of the life. It just means that, look, according to our understanding, here are the first test cases. If we then do a test and we find gaps on it, or a pen test or a security review, find gaps on it, at least it scales, because all we have to do is improve the test. Right?
But I think that's really the missing line, because at the bottom, I see this as 3 different layers. There are things that we as security, we should be providing a test for. Typically the stuff that is a bit more simple, right? The things that are convoluted business logic, you're probably not going to be in the position for the security team to support that way. But if we could have that lower layer as the test that we provide, this is what it needs to pass. The higher layer is where we threat model. And the higher layer above is what we risk manage, right? And we've got all these 3 different layers of how we communicate with technical teams.
Mario, why aren't you a CISO already?
I took a role as a CISO. I'm starting in a month.
But you know that we should be writing tests for threat models, right?
Yeah, but I'm talking about the practice of threat modeling, right? After the output of the threat modeling, then we can push it across, right? But the really easy stuff, right? Like checking cookies, like it literally comes up in every pen test I've ever seen, right? That you don't have secure cookies. And it's been that way for 20 years now, right? And I've never seen a pen test in my life that doesn't say the cookies are insecure, right? That's the low-hanging fruit that makes no sense. Why are we even having a conversation about it?
Yeah, so look, I have to say, this sounds very cheeky, but it was done to me, right? So I'm going to do it to you. Because once you become a CISO, let's talk after a while and see how much you care about cookies.
No, of course, it's one of those. I'm talking on Connect, and I'm talking about that exact subject this afternoon.
And the biggest problem, right? And this is something that I want to find a better way to visualize, is that the reason why the cookies don't get fixed is because development is broken, right? So because if it was easy to fix, they would do it, right? Just the same way that I can look at a website and can tell if they have continuous deployment, right? I can almost tell you how they're coding just by looking at the artifacts on a website. Because when you have some security practices, right, they produce almost different shapes, right? And then, so a lot of the things that we do in security, the reason they're not done is because the developer teams have not very good testing teams, testing workflows, and it's expensive for them. So almost the value, the return of investment is very low. Where when you have a really good test environment, you do those things because by then you're chipping off of everything that shouldn't be there, right? So the cookies is almost the canaries on the coal mine.
Yep.
Right. It's the lack of control of JavaScript. It's the lack of control of websites. Like it's kind of like you go to a website, you go like, I don't have the cookies, but I'm also consuming JavaScripts for 25 different places. Right. It's like I'm a lot more worried about all this other JavaScript that goes into me. Right. So I view those as an evolution of your maturity. Right. It's like the more mature you are, the more you're able to spend time on the little things. And the reality is, if you look at it, there's very few times, sometimes few teams that are able to invest in the test framework properly. Yep. And it kind of goes in waves, because you either have a separate QA team that doesn't have development resources, who are treated as second-class citizens, right? Because they are in the QA team, they're not, and then they cannot develop it, or then eventually come as scrap of that, and then put the QA into the developers, which kind of it has a lot of contradictions, but it sometimes gets it better. But the developers never have time to develop the test framework, so you end up having these applications that the ability to write tests is super convoluted, right? And then you have these horror stories of people who spend millions or hundreds of thousands on Selenium freaking white elephants, right? And all these things, because they never almost approach it from the point of view that if you don't design your application to be tested, right, test would always be a pain. And in security, what we ask for them, can you add these 30 or 100 or 500 tests to your application, right? So, but I think we should embrace that. I feel that we should turn around and say to the business, fund us, and we'll give you a better test framework, because we can't do our job without a good test framework.
That's actually part of the content of my talk in Kinevan this afternoon. So,
cool.
Because in Kinevan terms, it's about the scaffolding, right? So the organizational scaffolding from which things can go on. And so what I'm going to be talking about this afternoon is there are two pieces of scaffolding that sometimes security people shouldn't actually be doing security. We should actually be working on the scaffolding, which is the first one is an integrated approach to quality, which reverts back to exactly what you're saying. And the other one is about managing risks against business opportunities, right? Not necessarily the security stuff. Is how well are the business managers, the people running the business and technology, managing the risks against the opportunities they're pursuing. And if we can help them get the things in place so they do that for them, then we've got the scaffolding on which security can grow from the inside, right? As opposed to us trying to add security as something that someone else thinks about.
Like
so where are you putting
making
security?
it differentiator, or security as a differentiator?
Not as a differentiator, as not security in and of itself, right? As something that adds value on its own, but as part of the organizational scaffolding, right? We do security because we do quality products, and we do security because we manage our risks, right? Not the security stuff, right? It's overall quality and managing risks against opportunities.
Yeah, I would almost say that security relies on the scaffolding, right? Like the scaffolding, right, is what allows you to get the understanding of security, right? In fact, because the logic should be you should be able to take the scaffolding off, right, and eventually it should be secure and safe, right? So where are you positioning that bit? Is he on the complex, the complicated, the chaotic?
No, that's
where
it's independent of the type of ordered system, right? So this is kind of the spine by which biological systems evolve, right? And if you don't have a good scaffolding, like an exoskeleton, for instance, if you don't have that, everything falls off of there, right? So if you don't have that type of scaffolding, that identity of the organization in place, then security is an uphill battle, right? Because you're always going to be fighting for resources, etc., in a different way. And if people don't understand the language, it's going to make it that much harder. But when you do have that scaffolding in place, it makes it much easier, because you're at that point, you're not trying to sell security over the value of security. Your people are doing security because they care about quality and managing risks against opportunities, right?
Yeah. Cool. Looking forward to seeing that one, man.
Okay.
And we need to start planning another set of sessions, man, because I think there's some really great energy that's been created.
I love this week. It's been tough. My wife's not very happy for the amount of time I've been in front of my screen, but it's been great. I've been loving it.
Yeah, good. Yeah, I think we need to think about maybe something in 3 months or 4 months from now, right? But maybe we need to start zooming in on some of these topics. But I think the good news is we now have a good body of work that we can continue, which I think in the last summits, it was a shame because we had great conversations, but it feels that every year we do a reset. Where I think that even like some of the sessions that you led, right, or some of the other content we have, we can now say, look, there's the homework, watch those sessions, right? And now we want to continue to the next conversation, right? And now this year we managed to do it. And I agree with you. It's been long, but yeah, my wife is always like, family's like,
again,
going from 10 to 10. But we're still smiling, right? I think that. Look, I was telling you that the other day, right? The thing I like the most about the summit is that we come out of it, right, tired but happy. Where in other events you come out of it super stressed, almost saying never again, right? So I think it's important, right? I think it's important that although yes, it's quite exhausting sometimes, there's a level of energy, right? There's a level of learning that you do, which is really cool, right?
Yep.
And
so
Gidar,
Luis, Killian, any final thoughts? It's already 5 minutes past.
Yeah, I found the session very, very useful, and it's my first time attending, and I just want to say that I found the whole place very welcoming. And Dennis and everyone, thank you very much for all your organization for it. I really think I'm coming from, I suppose, the infrastructure side, and also I've come from the governance side, whereby I've been using, let's say, COBIT, NIST, and all that stuff. I've now obviously looked around and seeing that obviously codifying is important. And obviously I have experience using ASVS and SAM as well. I think, Dennis, you're right. I think looking at the end-to-end point, I think I would love to collaborate and work on that end-to-end point as well. So I'm happy to help out any way I can. I think it's been a very productive session, and hope I can continue helping out.
Thank you so much for being part.
Thank you very much, Gina, as well.
Luis?
Syrian, any comments?
Yeah, so
sorry.
I've done mine. Yeah. Thank you.
Sorry.
It's been a fun. Oh God, my children are in exactly right now. Sorry about that. Niños, fuera. I've been on mute the whole time, and then the children just run in right when I'm trying to have it. I say, no, it's been fun. I mean, I follow you, Dennis and Mario, on Twitter. I've been trying to get my head around this compliance as code topic. I've told already yesterday that we have forked internally ASVS to help us be our application security requirements inside the company. We're in the process of upgrading our old requirements, making sure that we're not stepping on anyone's toes, because what we're asking for is so much more than what had been done in the past. And now I have been playing with, I'm not sure if you know the cloud security project from OWASP, which also uses Gherkin to create threat stories and control stories. So I find the exercise very good in the same sense that we're trying to create these gaps. And by creating Gherkin stories, it's easier for developers to adopt the compliance aspects of ASVS. And also by offering ASVS in JSON or CSV or whatever they need, not just in the graveyard of data, PDF, they're more able to do something of value with it. So that's, and I agree. I mean, we need to get better at testing and offering scaffolding for developing teams to be able to integrate security into the process without every single team having to develop the same set of tests.
Yep.
So that's where you get buy-in from your constituents.
Yeah.
Bottom up.
Cool.
Cool.
Yeah.
Thank you all so much.
Great session. Thank you
It
all.
is so great. Thanks.